Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are grabbing a stack of sources that deal with the backbone of screenwriting structure.
Yeah.
And we're plunging into one of the most, confusing and maybe overly rigid concepts out there. A stories and B stories.
It sounds so simple on the surface.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, main plot, side plot.
Exactly.
But this topic is just constantly bogged down by these structural mandates that writers feel they must follow.
Yeah, these hard rules.
Our mission today really is to strip away some of that fear, maybe provide total clarity on subplots, and show you exactly how these secondary storylines can actually become like your greatest thematic tool.
Okay, because I think a lot of the initial confusion, it really just stems from the terminology itself. When we talk about A story and B story, those terms really began more in television, didn't they? Where traditional episodic shows often have multiple distinct plot lines running at the same time.
That's absolutely the key distinction.
Yeah.
In a, let's say, traditional broadcast hour, you definitely have an A story. It focuses on the primary character's main goal for that episode.
Right.
Then you've got a B story, often focusing maybe on a secondary character or a relationship issue.
And sometimes even more.
Oh, yeah, maybe even a C or D story.
Yeah.
And these are pretty discrete narrative tracks, They run parallel.
But then when we switch gears and talk about feature films, the movies you go see in a theater, the definition really tightens up, doesn't it?
Completely, yeah.
The A story is still that central primary plot line. It's the pursuit of the main external goal. You mentioned Clarice Starling hunting Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. That's the mission, the A story.
Definitely. And what we tend to call the B story in features, well, it isn't necessarily a totally separate plot. It's often just shorthand for the single most significant supporting storyline.
Okay, so it's less separate track, more supporting structure.
Exactly. It's an additional narrative element that really must integrate with and contribute to that main A story in some meaningful way.
Okay, let's unpack that core function then, because I think this is where the real value lies, beyond just filling pages. If a subplot is going to be genuinely successful in a feature, what's its fundamental requirement? What does it have to do?
Well, the absolute fundamental requirement is that it must serve the protagonist's journey. Simple as that.
Okay.
In features, the vast majority of stories are really about the protagonist going through some kind of transformative or defining experience. So if the A story dictates what the protagonist does, the external fight, the goal.
The action plot.
Yeah. The subplot almost always focuses on who they are or maybe who they become.
Yeah.
It helps facilitate that internal fight, that character arc.
So what's the risk then if a subplot doesn't really feed into that transformation or doesn't define the character in some way? Is it just padding? Is it just wasting time?
It absolutely risks being just a loose thread.
Yeah.
A good subplot needs to crystallize the thematic message of the story somehow. Yeah. It adds that deeper meaning we look for.
And structurally, does it need its own shape?
Oh, definitely. Structurally, just like the A story, it must set up and then resolve its own dramatic question. If you introduce some kind of dramatic tension, like, say, a looming divorce or maybe a broken friendship,
right,
and it never really resolves its tension, the audience leaves feeling a bit cheated, You spent valuable screen time on something that ultimately didn't matter to the core story.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because now we have to address those confusing rules that often tie writers up in knots. A lot of these really rigid structural guidelines, they seem to come from popular screenwriting manuals, maybe most famously Save the Cat.
Absolutely. That's a big one.
And writers often treat these prescriptive ideas almost like gospel, right? They confuse what might be a helpful tool for like an unbreakable law.
That's exactly it. And, when you look at why these rules exist, it often comes down to offering a sense of safety, maybe predictability. Right. Structure makes us feel safe as writers.
Sure.
But when you actually look at the best films, the ones that really resonate, they treat structure more like scaffolding, a support system, not a prison.
Right, not a paint-by-numbers kit.
Exactly. And when writers get confused, it's usually because they've internalized, I think, 3 common myths that come from these kinds of structural guides.
Okay, so let's tackle these rigid constraints head on then. What are the 3 biggest structural myths about B stories that you think are holding writers back?
Okay, myth number 1. I call it the myth of singularity. Just calling it the B story creates this belief that you're only allowed one subplot per screenplay.
Ah, okay. Like it's singular.
Right, and that's just simply false. A movie can, and honestly often does, have multiple supporting storylines running at the same time. The term B story is usually just shorthand for, like, the most emotionally significant secondary plot. Often that's the primary relationship arc, but not always.
Okay, that clarifies a huge sticking point for new writers, I bet. It's like giving permission to let your story world be complex.
It is.
Okay, myth number 2 is the famous midpoint mandate. This is the idea that the A story and the B story must intersect exactly at the midpoint of the screenplay, typically page 55 or 60 in a standard script.
Yeah, this one comes up a lot. And look, it's a fantastic organizational prompt. It really forces you to think about integrating your plot and your theme right at that most dynamic structural moment, the midpoint shift.
It's a good stress test.
It is, but
Yeah.
no, it is absolutely not a requirement for a movie to work. You see this pattern often because, frankly, it's effective. It works. But there are plenty of really highly successful screenplays where, say, the relationship subplot remains kind of parallel to the main plot until much later.
So the focus should be on integration, not necessarily the exact page number?
Precisely. Focus on integration, not script geometry.
Got it. Okay, and the third myth. This one's about timing, right? It concerns when the B story character gets introduced. It often seems linked to where the Save the Cat beat sheet places the formal B story introduction.
Mhm.
The idea that this relationship or the character central to it can't even show up until after the break into Act 2.
Oh, right, and this confuses people immensely because they think they have to, like, hold back key characters from Act 1.
Which feels unnatural sometimes.
It does. Supporting characters, including those who will eventually be involved in the main subplot, can absolutely be introduced in Act 1. Now, you probably want the focus of Act 1 to be squarely on setting up the main A story, the ordinary world, the inciting incident.
Sure, keep it clean.
Right. So the subplot itself might only develop in earnest in Act 2, but the characters themselves, they need to be established whenever the story organically needs them. Don't hold them back artificially.
We see this perfectly illustrated in Everything Everywhere All at Once, don't we? The Wayman character and the physical manifestation of their marital problems, those divorce papers.
Oh, yeah.
They're literally in the movie from the very beginning scenes.
Exactly. Evelyn is immediately aware of her crumbling marriage right from the start. Now, the subplot concerning that relationship, it doesn't truly escalate or play out emotionally until Act 2.
Right, once she's kind of thrown out of her normal context.
Exactly. Once she's forced out of her everyday reality and, crucially, gains the emotional perspective and, frankly, the space to actually deal with it.
Yeah.
So you might delay the subplot's development to maintain that A-story focus early on,
Yeah.
but you never delay the character introduction if that character is vital to the setup or the world.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now let's address another really common misconception, the subject matter itself. When people talk about a B story, they often just assume it has to be a romantic subplot.
Right.
Probably just because the primary relationship in a film is so often given that B story label.
Yeah, that's a big one. But no, subplots absolutely do not have to be romantic. Relationship subplots, sure, they're incredibly common. Why? Because they touch on universal themes, connection, validation, love,
Yeah.
conflict.
Things everyone relates to.
Exactly. But they are not mandatory. You have huge varieties of subplots that aren't romantic at all.
What's fascinating here, I think, is that relationship subplots, whether they're romantic or not, they can often feel less goal-oriented, maybe more focused on emotional states compared to the central A story, which is often purely about achieving some external, tangible goal.
That's a really crucial difference, I think. Think about Shaun of the Dead.
Great example.
While the A story is clearly that desperate survival plot, get to the Winchester pub, survive the zombies.
Right, very clear goal.
Very clear. One of the absolute key subplots is Sean's relationship with his best friend, Ed. It's entirely non-romantic. It focuses on things like loyalty, maturation, responsibility, Sean needing to grow up.
And that friendship arc is essential for Sean's change, isn't it?
It's absolutely essential to Sean's ultimate thematic growth. So the specific subject of the subplot doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact that it contributes something important thematically and that it completes its own dramatic arc.
Okay, I really see the distinction now. We should view the B story, or maybe just main subplot, not as this mandatory romance, but more as the primary vehicle for the protagonist's internal transformation.
That's a great way to put it.
So if we start treating subplots as these flexible tools rather than, rigid rules, what are some functional prompts we can use? How can we ensure they're contributing effectively? What are the common ways they actually propel the story forward?
Yeah, I like thinking of these as maybe structural prompts or discovery tools. They help you figure out how your subplot can best support either the A story goal or the thematic lesson you're trying to explore.
Okay, so what's the first function?
Okay, function number 1. The subplot directly impacts the pursuit of the A story goal. This is where the secondary storyline actively affects how the protagonist is able to reach, or maybe is blocked from reaching, their primary objective.
That's fascinating because it means the subplot isn't just about, like, feelings or theme. It can actually be part of the plot machinery itself.
Precisely. It can be totally functional to the plot. Take the relationship between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs.
Okay.
The subplot is the development of their really bizarre predatory mentorship.
Yeah, deeply unsettling.
But that relationship is the only reason Clarice actually advances in the Buffalo Bill case. Without the specific insights she gains from Lecter in their interaction.
Which come from their weird connection.
Exactly. Without those, the A-story pursuit just fails instantly. Or think about The Devil Wears Prada. Andy's friendship with Nigel, the fashion editor.
Stanley Tucci's character.
That relationship helps her understand the unspoken rules of the fashion world. And that knowledge is crucial for her succeeding in her external goal, working for Miranda, even though she ultimately chooses to leave that world behind. His help is functional to her A-story success.
Okay, that makes sense. So function number 2.
Function number 2. The subplot directly affects the protagonist's transformation. It helps them learn the thematic lesson of the story. This is less about those external plot mechanics we just talked about, and much more about resolving the internal character flaw or need.
This feels like the core of what we discussed earlier.
It often is. I mean, a really powerful, maybe the ultimate example, is the Wayman relationship back in EEAO.
Right.
The A story is saving the entire multiverse, this huge external goal. But the true internal lesson for Evelyn is about reconciling her deep cynicism and learning compassion and acceptance.
And Waymond is key to that.
He's absolutely key. She needs to reconcile with Waymond, and not just him, but accept the fundamental value of his simple, kind approach to life before she can truly understand and accept the movie's core themes of universal kindness and, finding joy in the present moment, even in the mundane. That relationship is the absolute thematic linchpin.
And we see that same type of character resolution, maybe less cosmically, in something like Crazy Stupid Love, Cal's relationship with his son, Robbie.
Oh, yeah, good example.
Robbie's sort of hopeless romanticism and his own teenage heartbreak that forces Cal to reflect on his own identity, his failings as a husband and father. And that reflection is what actually allows him to mature and eventually find his way back to his wife. The kid's subplot fuels the dad's arc.
Perfectly put. Okay, and function number 3. The subplot explores an additional thematic angle. So if the main story is fundamentally about one core idea, the subplot can offer a slightly different perspective on that same core idea. It provides layers and complexity to the overall theme.
Okay. Could you give us an example of how a parallel subplot achieves that, like explores the theme from a different angle?
Sure. Think about Finding Dory. The A story is clearly Dory searching for her parents, right? And it deals with themes of memory, disability, belonging, independent survival.
Yep.
Running concurrently with that, you have the subplot involving Nemo and Marlin. Their relationship, their journey together, explores a different angle of those same themes. Things like parental protection versus letting go, learning to trust your loved ones even when it's scary.
So they're both pursuing family, but from different emotional starting points.
Exactly. Or look at Ratatouille. The central conflict is Remy the rat and Linguini the human and their secret cooking arrangement. That's the A story.
Right, the core gimmick.
Yeah. But the Linguini and Colette romance subplot, it explores a different facet of themes like mentorship, trust, and finding professional belonging within that specific high-pressure restaurant world. And it develops somewhat independently of the main rat and the Took plot, but it deepens the film's ideas about talent and collaboration.
What's really great about thinking of it this way is that a single subplot could actually weave through all 3 of these functions, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Often the best ones do.
And the impact it has, it could be positive or negative for the protagonist's goals or growth. And the amount of screen time it gets is totally flexible. It could be an arc completed in just a couple of really dynamic scenes, or it could be something that's woven intricately throughout the entire movie.
Precisely. You don't have to stress about, putting a specific B story beat exactly at minute 25 just because a book told you to.
Right. It frees you up.
It really should.
Yeah.
The main takeaway here, I think, is to focus on contribution and arc completion. Ask yourself, what supporting storylines are absolutely necessary to flesh out your protagonist's life and the world of your story.
Okay.
Which ones are essential to assist their character growth, and which ones fundamentally support the theme you're exploring. If a storyline does those things and has its own mini-arc, then it's probably a necessary subplot regardless of what you call it.
That feels like the perfect summary. Subplots, or B stories, whatever label we use, they're not constraints to fear. They're really essential tools. Tools for enhancing your screenplay by supporting the theme, assisting the protagonist's growth, and just giving us a more complete, resonant view of the story world.
Yeah, and since every single story is unique, if there is maybe one rule to adhere to, it's simply this. Find what works best for the specific story you want to tell. Try to disregard the really strict mandates and just focus on ensuring every secondary plotline you include has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and that somehow connects back to the thematic heart of your movie.
Excellent advice. Okay, so we'll leave you with this final thought to maybe mull over. Consider a favorite film of yours, one you know really well. Don't just analyze the main plot this time. Instead, ask yourself, which of the secondary relationships or storylines felt the most complete? And how did its resolution, its ending, maybe unlock or crystallize the thematic lesson of the entire movie? Because that connection, that's usually where the B story magic truly resides, long after the external conflict of the A story has been resolved.